This time on shift points, we do a lot of this, a lot of the Googling, trying to find parts. Sometimes the shop gets dirty, tools get everywhere. Sometimes you just gotta clean up. So we told you guys last time that these fittings that actually screw into the rack, they're actually a little too big. And if you put two of them side by side, then they actually butt up against each other so close that you can't put a socket or anything on it. So what are you doing, Dad, right now?
I'm just squaring this flats on this, fitting up on the flats on this hex collet holder so I can just cut the same amount off all 5 sides of this thing.
6 sides.
Sorry, 6 sides of this thing.
So I told you we were waiting on so we ordered this hex collet. So that goes in here, or collet block, hex collet block, so that he can get everything set up, and all he's going to do is just rotate this, each one around, and then that'll let him cut these flats down. What are these, 9/16? 5/8.
The threads are 9/16. This outside's 7/8.
7/8.
I'm going to cut it down to 3/4.
Okay. So he's going to cut both. He'll probably end up cutting down 2 fittings to where they're smaller in size, so we can put a standard 3/4 inch.
We'll try one and see if it will clear us. All I want to do is get enough room between them when it's on the rack to get a socket on both of them. I can use a 3/4 and a 7/8 socket, but right now they're sitting so close together on the rack. These two shoulders are so close together they'll turn, but you can't get a socket on either one of them if you put them down together. So I'm just going to cut hopefully just one. I may have to cut 2 to get enough clearance to get a socket on, but a thin wall socket may go with just cutting one. So we'll try it and see.
Yeah, so this collet block, and then he ended up not having a 9/16 collet that goes in the block. So that's the 2 parts that we ended up having to wait for so that we could do this. So once this is done, these are cut down, then we can get these back in the rack. We've already mocked up what we need. We can probably go over to Joel and go ahead and get him to make our high pressure hose, and then our low pressure side, we're waiting on the fittings to come for a barb fitting. It's going to go to a 6AN to a barb fitting. So then that will have our power steering lines cleaned up and ready to go, basically. When you're doing stuff like this, it's all about repeatability, right? Especially when you're working with mills and lathes and stuff like that. So really the setup takes as much time as the actual process usually. So it's like off camera, Dad was kind of having to do some setup stuff to try and make sure you got that block in the same spot every time, so that when he makes a cut on that flat, all he has to do is just blow the shavings off, make sure nothing gets in the way to interfere with how it's going to lay, flip the block over, lock it back down into the vise, and then cut the next flat. So it's all about setup and repeatability. You can see all 6 sides have been cut down, so it's smaller all the way around.
Should be 3/4.
Should be 3/4. Hopefully. 3/4. That's a good thing. What? 3/4. So we got both these fittings here. Remember, whenever you have an O-ring, make sure you use some sort of lubrication on it, grease or whatever, because that is the best way to tear an O-ring is to not lubricate it before you put it in. So those fittings have O-rings that go into on the shoulders when they go into the rack down here in those two open fittings right there.
Very important on these unisteer racks. The make sure you don't cross sides with the high pressure and the low pressure. The low pressure fitting on these are 5/8 18. The high pressure side is a 14 millimeter by 1.5. You get them switched, you put high pressure to the low pressure side, it'll blow the seals out of the rack. So that's pretty important that you put those hook those up the way they're supposed to be.
So I know we've mentioned that a couple times, but like seriously, that's really important. It says in the manual, it will void the warranty. If you hook it up wrong out of your own stupidity or not paying attention or whatever, blows the seals out of the rack, you call them and tell them that, you're done. You got to buy a new rack. So it's really important if you're doing that with this. We already test fitted them, and it looks like that the fittings are a deep well socket will go on them, no problem, between the two of them. So since those are pretty much wrapped up, we are going to go ahead and lock them down. So that's got them in there. I'll probably have to circle back around to the front to show you. But you'll be able to see the difference that is there. So you can see how these fittings, how they used to be the same, have that same size hex. Now there's very clearly a gap between them and there's two different sizes. So now we can go ahead and tighten them down and they can live there. See, easily got a deep weld socket on there, ratchet, make sure that they're tight, make sure that O-ring seats properly. It's just gonna work great. That's the other thing. We went ahead since we pulled the power steering pump off. So this is the power steering pump and the bracket that mounts into. So the power steering pump goes on, and this bracket kind of caps over it. But you can see this line here. This is going to end up being our high pressure line. This is just 3/8 hose that we're using to mock it up for Joel. He can use this so we know how much length we need. But you can see that will go into the rack like this, and then it's going to end up looking something like that, where this fitting up here is going to go straight into the back of the power steering pump. So something that Dad also found, I think from Detroit Speed, is this piece here. So it replaces the stock fitting that is it has a female hole in it, and then it puts a 6AN fitting on the back side of that, which a male 6AN fitting on the back side, which is exactly what this fitting is. So that makes it to where you can come straight out of the back of the pump with that fitting and then run and do your high pressure hose. Chicken's done. So one of Dad's good friends and a guy who's been following along with us reached out to us and saw that we needed some transmission cooler lines. We were talking about that in that last video when we clearanced that lower radiator hose for him. He said, "Hey, I've got some lines that are made exactly for what you guys are doing, the stainless braided lines." So we went out there and got them from him, bought them from him, and these are just going to work just really great, and they're going to look really nice as well. Like I said, I already have the fittings for the radiator on this side, going into the radiator on this side, and then this will go into the transmission on this side. So to go with that, because we have such a tight fit where we are in this truck, and let me show you what I'm talking about. So the transmission tunnel here, it's going to set really pretty tightly against this transmission so that we could save up as much room as we can. So right here are the two fittings on where they come out, and then these have the stock like quick connect style on them. With this and with those lines, if they were trying to come straight out, you could see where we could, especially on this top one, we're probably going to run into this transmission tunnel that we have, or that Dad built for it. So what we did was I got online and started looking and found some fittings that'll be 90s. These are swivels. So these screwed in. This should screw right into where the transmission. It has the O-ring. I already have it greased, so that I can go ahead and put those in, and then that'll have that turn straight down. These also swivel, so we can adjust where they come out at. So I'm going to go ahead and get these put in place, and then we can start running those transmission lines. Of course, it's the wrong size. Nope, I just don't know how to use a wrench. How far does this go down in there? That would kill me if he was here. You could see me using this open-end wrench. He really loves it when I do that. Finally. The O-ring was up onto the threads. No wonder it was so hard. I think this is a first. This hex here is the same size as the stock one's, also a 19 millimeter. So that is very unusual. And then, like I said, this is a swivel here, so we can kind of point them however we want and make sure that we have good clearance on everything. Should put in the bottom one first. Also got full rotation there also, so that's always good. Now the question is, if that line is going to come out in any direction, it's not going to run straight into the case. I think the bottom one will. Might have to make a loop around this direction for that one. So something kind of cool that I don't think I've ever actually talked about, and we can kind of see it here in this setting. So down here is a neutral safety switch. And Dad built this bracket and put that in there so that the truck won't start, just like in a stock one. The truck itself won't start unless it's in park or neutral. So and we can't see it on this, he actually like made a cam on the bottom of that sensor, so the sensor is engaged when it's in park and it's engaged when it's in neutral, but it doesn't engage in any other gear. So if that circuit's not made, the truck won't start. So just another something kind of cool that I feel like most people probably wouldn't even think about doing. He's machined it and made it happen. So fittings are in. Let's see if the lines will go where we want them to now. Yesterday we ran over to Styles and Joel went ahead and got that high pressure line made for us. So you can see here just how nice what a good job he does on all this stuff. So that big, the big fitting that you saw as we were mocking everything up, it gets crimped down to this small. So I mean, it's probably crimped down a good ½ inch or more from where it's expanded out, and then the crimp itself. So this is the side that'll go into the back of the power steering pump. And this is that nice high pressure Gates hose. He cuts and does all this in-house. Same thing over here, and this is the 90 that'll go into the rack itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get this on, and we'll make sure that that's going to clearance the low pressure side also. So, and because we've got a few options for fittings on that, so we'll go ahead and get this on, so then we can figure out which is the best fitting to use for the low pressure side. So luckily it looks like the lines are actually a little too long, which is good. So you can always kind of route it to where they're not in the way, but you can never, if they're too short, that's not good. So you can see here, turning the line on for us right here. You can see they kind of come out of these fittings in the transmission. They kind of loop around and then come back up toward the front. And then we've kind of got them run beside the transmission, under the or above the cross member, and they'll come somewhere in this area, come forward, and then we'll run some 90-degree fittings off of the radiator and screw these into them, and those will lay something like that. So that should clearance that hose when this gets picked up. That'll get picked up like that somewhere in here, and then this will clearance over here, and everything should be good. So those are run, and then the other thing that we got on here, at least mocked in, here's that high pressure hose. So there's the 90. It runs it, and this hose kind of pushes the hose back over here against the block, so it stays away from the exhaust up here, and it keeps it away from the steering rack down here. So get that pushed over here. That fitting is going to come out like that, and then we already have the low pressure side on here too. So I think we're going to end up using this straight and this 90. That's probably the cleanest way to do it. This hose will kind of come out and loop up here into the power steering box whenever we get it put on. So, what do you think? Good. That's what matters. So you can see, so there's a lot going on here that hasn't been tied up just yet. Here's the battery cables. Those will go up here into the battery box. This is part of the PSI harness. Of course, those will get routed away from this eventually. This is for the PSI harness. And then right up here is where the lines come off the transmission. So we've been trying to figure out the best way to do it with the way that those fittings are on the radiator up there. They're two, and they're kind of spaced, roughly that far apart, And so we've looked at this line coming this direction, running straight up this and going there. Then looked at this one going over there. Really, the best thing that we can do, and what we're going to have to do, is if you roll up here, can't see it under here. Let me get out of here and show you. Get up here and look at the fittings, or where they come in at. So that line is attached right here. That line is not currently. That's roughly how far apart they are, about 8 inches or so, I would say. What we need to find is a 90-degree inverted flare fitting that can go in this and go into that. That line can come that direction and route in here. And then this line, instead of running it down and under the transmission like we can route it in the same direction because it's a little long. We can route it that direction and come into that 90 there. So far, I have been looking for those fittings, just like everything else so far. I've been looking, but I haven't been able to find anything. So hopefully we can come up with something. If we can come up with that inverted flare to inverted flare 90-degree fitting, those fittings are half 20 threads. If we can come up with that, that'll have the transmission lines routed where they need to be, for the most part, clear of everything. There's going to have to be a lot of the old zip ties going up to kind of pull everything up into place whenever we get everything attached, because, well, just honestly, there's a whole lot of stuff in a really small package like you've seen so far. So yeah, hopefully if we can find those fittings, it'll have those done, and then we'll slap on the power steering box and get that in too, just so that I can check something off of the box, since apparently the plumbing is just going to be the death of us. I am going to go ahead and pull this thermostat housing off and get that auto pump adapter, the correct seal into that, and that will have coolant lines completely wrapped up. So that's what I'm going to do now. So we decided that trying to find an inverted flare to inverted flare fitting was hopeless. We looked everywhere we could, all the parts stores, nothing had anything. Found some stuff online, but then we just got to thinking, or well, Dad got to thinking, we'll just make our own. So we took some brake line here. This will go into the radiator. This will stick out here with a union, and then the hose will come in here and plug in. That'll make our 90s. This is as tight as we could get with the tube emitter that we have, this one here. So make another one like this, just a little. This will go on the driver's side. Make one a little shorter than this if possible. Make it a little shorter to put on this side over here, and we'll have two, one in this direction, one in this direction. Lines will run into them, This one will actually be a little less than 90 and point it back like this. And that should give us everything that we need. As far as the fittings go, then we can at least get the transmission cooler lines on. I did get the auto plumb adapter onto this one, the proper seal on it. So it's sitting there, it's curing. You're supposed to let those cure for minimum a few hours. We're in no rush, of course, so it'll set overnight. That'll cure up, then put the thermostat housing back on to the motor, and we should be set on the plumbing as far as the cooling system goes. So then we will take these, get them on. Dad's looking to see if he has any other line that size. We might have to run back to O'Reilly's and get a piece. Yeah, but yeah, so it's gonna work. It's gonna look pretty good too. So, like I said, that's what, as long as it functions and then it looks nice. Anything that you can make function well and also look good is bonus points. All right, so nothing's tight yet. We're still waiting on the thermostat housing to dry, but you can see that one comes out into a 90. Over here on the driver's side, this one kind of come out it was just over a 45 degree. Like I said, nothing's tight or anything, but this is in general how they'll kind of run. They'll come out like this and then run down beside the motor away from the exhaust, and then they'll come in to in here, and they'll run something like that. Because of this boss and everything that's on the transmission case, we had to do this, like I said earlier, had to do this little loop to get them back here and out of the way. But running that extension out and everything, that let the hoses have enough slack in them. They're not bound up, they're nothing like that, so they should be good. I think maybe tomorrow we're going to come in and check the routing, make sure all the routing's good, put it on the power steering pump, get the high pressure hooked up, get the low pressure hooked up, get that bracket back in place, and then just we'll have all that stuff basically just checked off. Just tighten everything, make sure we didn't miss anything else on clearance wise. So I think we're going to be good. I think tomorrow we'll finally have this plumbing to a punctuation point. We'll be able to just cross it off the list. Are you excited about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
As you can tell by his boyish demeanor. So a while back, Dad found these heat shrink hose clamps. So instead of having they're a power grip brand. They're made by Gates. We got them at the Napa store, but they're just a heat shrink hose clamp. So instead of having those big clunky metal hose clamps, these when you hit them with a heat gun, they'll compress down and they clamp down on it, and you're not getting them off. So you got to cut them off whenever if you need to change it or do something with it, which is really good because you don't have to worry about that clamp coming loose or anything like that. Over time, those can back out. They can do all kinds of goofy stuff. So like I said, with these, we'll hit them with a heat gun. It'll shrink down. So on the low pressure side of the power steering, that's what we're going to do. We're going to put it on that straight fitting. We're going to shrink it down. We'll go ahead and do that right now. So it works just like a heat shrink if you were using it for like an electrical heat shrink. You can see it starts to kind of bulge a little, and then it starts shrinking down. Just kind of turn it, make sure you get kind of even heat on the whole thing. So you can see how that's shrunk down now onto that. There's no gap at all between it and the hose, and everything's real tight and how it's supposed to be. So we went ahead and, so you saw us heat shrink that fitting. Now I've got the power steering pump put in here. You can see The high pressure side on the back of the pump, we went ahead and got that in. Down there, you can see we got that 90 and the straight both tight. We're actually able to get open end wrenches on both of those fittings, so they're both tight now. Got this tight, so we're going to go ahead and bolt the power steering pump back up here, which is one bolt that holds it back here. Put that there, or we'll tighten this up first, tighten up that fitting first, put this up, and then we'll grab that bracket and go ahead and get it put in place. So that'll have all of this power steering, the hoses, all the power steering lines, everything run, ready to go. So yeah, that's what we're going to do next. Got the bracket in there now. Dad's working on tightening all these down. He's going to tighten each bolt kind of a little at a time so it cinches the whole thing back together so it doesn't bind anything up. So there's 3 bolts that actually go into the face of the power steering pump, and there are 4 bolts that go into the head and to the block of the engine to hold this whole assembly on. And I know there's probably people asking, why do you guys take so much time to make sure that, you didn't go buy a new accessory kit, or you didn't go do this and do all that to save the space on the front of the engine? Well, for a couple reasons. First off, all of this works very well. When we pulled out of the truck, it was running. Everything's going to function exactly like it's supposed to. Second off, I can go to the parts store and buy a belt for a 2009 Chevy Silverado, and it's going to go right back onto this engine. So you don't have to get any sort of custom or anything. You don't have to try and measure, make sure you got a spare belt or anything like that. If you go to the Napa store or O'Reilly's or wherever, they're going to have that in stock 9 times out of 10. So keep all that stuff the same. Keep everything as much as we can this way so that it's as easy as possible to work on. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what this truck's about. It's supposed to be a cruiser. You can drive it. You don't have to worry about, having some sort of super special tool or some sort of super special this that you have to wait 2 weeks to get from wherever. You got to order it online. You can go to the parts store, and this thing is just as easy to work on as an actual 2009 Chevy Silverado.
Unless you need radiator hoses.
Unless you need radiator hoses. Yeah, that's true. That would not be so easy. All right. So now we've got the bracket on, the power steering pump bolted up. See, the low pressure line is here. It's attached to the reservoir. So that's all together. Down there's those fittings. Got the high pressure hooked up on the back side of the pump, high pressure on the rack. And like me and Dad were talking about, everything that we've done over the past 2 weeks is now officially hidden away to where no one can see it. Luckily, you guys are watching on YouTube, so you can see it. These wrenches in here that Daddy dropped. All right. We're putting this power steering pump pulley back on. Dad's got this pulley remover and installer. That's what we're using here. And who don't know it, pulley was off. You guys saw all that, of course. It's got a thrust washer and a roller bearing here, and then basically an anvil that screws up onto this post. There's a threaded insert that goes into the pulley shaft, and then do this, and it matches the pulley back on in place. Okay. Got it. Finally.
Yeah.
All of the plumbing is in place. Power steering lines, transmission cooler lines, and the radiator cooler, or the coolant lines, are all in place. Radiator's in place. This is, of course, not the final time it's all going to go in there, but this is really, really good. Upper radiator hose, lower radiator hose with the thermostat housing. So that's all thermostat housings in there. We do have to grab a new thermostat. So the Mr. Gasket thermostat housing calls for an 04 to 08 thermostat to go in this. So we have the 09, of course. So we got a new thermostat housing. We'll get a Delco one of those. That runs over to the other side. You can see here we've got the 90 and the just over 45 for the transmission cooler lines. That does clear this lower radiator hose pretty well. We'll zip tie these together and make sure they stay back. It'll get attached further back here in the back too. Make sure that it doesn't try and move around on us. And then you all saw the power steering lines already. All of that stuff's good. The pulley's back on. All this stuff's back how it's going to live. This is where it's going to be for the next while, hopefully. So we'll put the alternator back on. And all of this is wrapped up. I know this has kind of been a saga. We've kind of put like, well, I think this is the third video that's basically just been about this plumbing. But this is real life. This isn't a TV show. We're showing you guys this is what you get into with this. I know it's on TV camera. They can turn that off. They can go to work and get everything figured out, or they've got 100 guys getting paid a lot of money to figure it out for them. This is just what we have to do. Are we saying that this is perfect or the only way to do it? No, probably not. You guys probably could come up with a couple ways also, but it's how we're going to do it. And if everything looks like it's going to be, it looks like how it's going to be, I think it's going to function really well. And we should have, as hopefully, knock on wood, we'll have as few of issues as possible with it because we've taken this extra time to really work through this. The coolant lines, power steering lines, stuff like that, that's the kind of stuff that'll leave you stranded on the side of the road. We're calling AAA to get us towed home. If we take this extra time that we've taken to do this to really sit down and think about it, make sure we try and make everything as bulletproof as possible, that's how you save yourself a lot of headache in the future, hopefully. Now, I'm not telling you that this is perfect. I'm telling you that we think this is the best that we could have done with it, given the space and everything that we have going on. I'm really happy with it. I know he's happy with it. So that's really what matters. So I'm glad you guys are watching this and that you're seeing kind of the struggles that go into it and the amount of time that it takes to do what seem like just minuscule little tasks. And I know I haven't shown this board in a little while. I don't even think since the first videos, last time I showed it. But we'll go ahead and go right here and we'll mark out the transmission lines, radiator hoses, and then the power steering lines. That's marked out. I have a couple different lists depending on what we're looking at doing, so go ahead and knock those out too. But this is coming together. It really is. This is kind of what I have roughed in on what we need to get the for the first fire. So we actually have the heater hoses. That's done. That knocked out. So I mean, really, we're not too far off of getting this thing. I know I've said that like a dozen times now. We're really not too far from hearing this thing run for the first time. How it sits right now, really, as long as my wiring and everything's done, I need to run a couple grounds, make sure everything's grounded up good. We could theoretically turn the key and get this thing started. So maybe we'll try and do that next time on Shift Points. Thanks for watching. Also, one last thing. Thank you guys so much for watching that VHS drags that we put up on Wednesday. It's really been more of a hit than we ever would have considered it, would ever thought it would have been. So just thanks for everybody for watching that. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go check it out. Some really cool old footage from Greer, Farmington, Wilkesboro. I think Mooresville Dragway's on there also. So it's about an hour and 13 minutes worth of just bare bones drag racing. So if that's something that sounds like you'd be interested in it, which, like I said, thankfully there's been a lot of people that have been interested in it so far, go check it out. So thanks for watching.